September 8, 1941. Leningrad, Soviet Union. German artillery shells rained down on the last supply route into the city. Inside a cramped laboratory on Nevsky Prospect, a 37-year-old food scientist named Olga Iosifovna Shatalova stares at equations that will decide whether 3 million people live or die. The ending will break your heart. Stay until the last minute. Before these, do you have any memories of World War II? I wish you good health. The mathematics of siege warfare are brutally simple. 3 million civilians, 400 grams of bread per day minimum for survival, 60,000 tons of flour remaining in Leningrad's warehouses. By September 12, 1941, Olga Shatalova has calculated the city has exactly 2.5 weeks before complete famine. She stands in the State Bread Research Institute, a requisitioned university building that smells of chalk dust and fear. The windows are taped against bomb blasts. Sandbags line the corridors. Outside, air raid sirens wail across a city that has suddenly become the Soviet Union's second-largest prison. 4 days ago, German Army Group North completed the encirclement. Field Marshal Wilhelm Ritter von Lieb's forces cut the last railway line at MGA Station. Now 2.8 million civilians and 500,000 Red Army defenders are trapped in a 35-kilometer perimeter with no way in and no way out. Shatalova's superior, Director Mikhail Fyodorovich Nestorov, spreads maps across the laboratory table. The Badaev warehouses burned last night, he says quietly. German incendiary bombs. 3,000 tons of flour. Gone. She doesn't react. Can't afford to. The Badaev complex held 1/10 of Leningrad's grain reserves. The fires burned so hot that sugar melted through the floorboards and crystallized in the cellars below. Civilians are already digging up the sweet, earth-contaminated syrup with spoons. How long? Nestorov asks. Shatalova adjusts her wire-rimmed glasses and rechecks her calculations. At current rations, 16 days. Then we start dying. The room falls silent except for the distant thump of artillery. Everyone present understands what start dying means. Not gradual malnutrition, mass starvation, bodies in the streets, cannibalism, the complete collapse of a European city. The military Soviet wants options. Nestorov continues. Anything, everything. Shatalova has spent 12 years studying food chemistry at the Leningrad Institute of Technology. She has published 17 papers on grain composition and nutritional biology. She knows exactly how many proteins, fats, and carbohydrates a human body needs to survive winter in sub-zero temperatures. And she knows that what she's about to propose will sound insane. We reformulate the bread, she says. Replace wheat flour with non-food cellulose products, sawdust from furniture factories, cottonseed cake from oil mills, hydrolyzed cellulose from paper production. We maintain the 125-gram ration but reduce actual flour content to 25%. One of the Institute's senior bakers, Pavel Andreev, stares at her. That's not bread. That's construction material. It's calories. Shatalova corrects. 10 grams of hydrolyzed cellulose provides 4 calories. Cottonseed cake provides protein. Pine sawdust contains trace minerals. If we calculate the ratios precisely. People won't eat it. Andreev interrupts. Sawdust bread, they'll riot. They'll riot faster when there's nothing at all. Shatalova replies. Her voice remains level, clinical. Emotion is a luxury Leningrad can no longer afford. Our choice is between unpalatable bread and no bread. I'll take unpalatable. Nestorov studies the equations covering her notepad. Percentages, molecular formulas, nutritional breakdowns. This will work, mathematically, if the ratios are exact, Shatalova says. A 2% variance in cellulose content causes intestinal blockage. 3% too little protein causes organ failure. But at precisely these proportions, she taps the paper. The human digestive system can process it. Barely, but enough. The director looks at the numbers for a long time. Outside, another German shell impacts somewhere in the Kirov district. The building shakes slightly. Write up the formula, he finally says. Full specifications. I'll take it to the City Defense Committee tonight. Shatalova nods and returns to her desk. She has until dawn to create a recipe for bread that isn't bread, to calculate the exact mathematical ratio between survival and death. The siege of Leningrad is 4 days old. It will last 872 more. September 15th, 1941. The City Defense Committee occupies a fortified basement beneath Smolny Institute. Party Secretary Andrei Zhdanov sits at the head of a table covered with military maps and supply manifests. Around him, generals and political officers argue about defensive positions and counterattacks. Olga Shatalova stands at the far end of the room, a sheaf of calculations in her hands, waiting to present the most controversial food science proposal in Soviet history. Zhdanov finally notices her. Comrade Shatalova, the bread situation. She steps forward. No preamble. No apology. The current ration of 500 grams per civilian per day is unsustainable. At present consumption rates, our flour reserves will be depleted by October 3rd. I propose reducing the ration to 125 grams per person and reformulating the bread composition to extend supplies through winter. 125 grams. General Mikhail Dukhanov, commander of the 42nd Army, looks up sharply. That's a quarter of subsistence level. Yes, Shatalova agrees, which is why the reformulation is critical. Standard bread is 70% wheat flour, 15% water, 10% yeast and salt, 5% potato starch. My formula replaces 50% of the wheat flour with alternative ingredients while maintaining minimum nutritional value. She distributes typed sheets around the table. The new composition, 25% rye flour, 25% chaff and bran screenings, 15% hydrolyzed cellulose derived from pine sawdust, 15% cottonseed cake, 10% malt flour from brewing waste, 10% ground flaxseed cake. The room erupts. Sawdust, someone shouts. You want us to feed the city sawdust? Shatalova doesn't flinch. Hydrolyzed cellulose. The sawdust is chemically processed to break down the lignin bonds, making it digestible. It provides bulk and approximately 4 calories per 10 grams. More importantly, it makes the reduced flour ration physically viable. A 125-gram portion of standard bread would be too small, too dense. People would feel like they're eating nothing. This formula creates a larger, more substantial piece. Zhdanov leans forward. Will it poison people? Not at these exact ratios, Shatalova responds. I've spent 72 hours calculating the maximum cellulose content the human digestive system can process. 15% is the threshold. 16% causes severe constipation and potential intestinal rupture. 14% doesn't provide sufficient bulk. She points to a specific equation on the handout. The cottonseed cake provides essential proteins and fats. The malt flour adds necessary B vitamins. The flaxseed cake contributes omega fatty acids. Individually, these ingredients are barely edible. Together, in these precise proportions, they create a nutritionally complete, if unpleasant, food product. How long will this formula extend our supplies? Zhdanov asks. With strict enforcement of the 125-gram civilian ration and 200-gram military ration, we can sustain the city until Lake Ladoga freezes. Shatalova calculates aloud. Mid-November. That gives us 8 weeks to establish an ice road supply route across the lake. Dukhanov shakes his head. The Finns control the northern shore. The Germans control the southern shore. Even if we can build an ice road, Luftwaffe bombers will. That's a military problem, Zhdanov interrupts. Right now, we're discussing a food problem. Comrade Shatalova, will people actually eat this? Shatalova pauses. This is the question she's been dreading. The test batches are difficult. The texture is coarse. The taste is bitter. The color is gray-black. But yes, it's edible. And after 2 weeks of true hunger, people will eat anything. The committee members exchange glances. They all know she's right. Starvation eliminates preference. Hunger makes every choice simple. Production capacity? Zhdanov asks. Every bakery in Leningrad can produce this formula using existing equipment. Shatalova confirms. We'll need to establish collection points for sawdust from furniture factories and construction sites. The cottonseed cake will come from oil pressing facilities. The malt flour from breweries. I've identified 17 industrial sites that can supply the necessary materials. She spreads another document on the table, a detailed logistics plan. Each bakery receives exact measurements. No deviations. The formula only works at these precise ratios. I'll personally train brigade leaders at each facility. Zhdanov studies her face. You understand what you're asking. If this formula fails, if people get sick, you'll be held responsible. I understand, Shatalova says quietly. And if we do nothing, 3 million people will starve by December. I'll accept responsibility for trying. The party secretary looks around the table. No one speaks. Finally, he nods. Approved. Implement immediately. The new ration begins September 20th. Shatalova gathers her papers. She has 5 days to transform Leningrad's entire bread production system. 5 days to train bakers in a formula that shouldn't work, but must. As she climbs the stairs out of the basement, she can hear artillery fire in the distance. The Germans are close enough now that you can track the trajectory of shells by sound. Close enough that every window in the city rattles with each impact. Close enough that there's no escape. September 20th, 1941. Bakery number 18 on Fontanka Street. 3:47 a.m. Olga Shatalova stands before 47 of Leningrad's master bakers, all of them men, most of them skeptical. The industrial ovens behind them radiate heat into the pre-dawn darkness. On the steel preparation tables sit piles of ingredients that have never before been combined in any kitchen in human history. This is the sawdust, she says, pointing to a mound of fine brown powder. Hydrolyzed cellulose from the Kirov furniture factory, chemically processed to break down lignin. It's been boiled in dilute acid, neutralized, washed, and dried. It will not harm you. She picks up a handful and lets it sift through her fingers. Several bakers recoil. This is cottonseed cake. A gray-green compressed brick, byproduct of oil extraction, high in protein and residual fats. Grind it fine. She moves down the table. Malt flour, flaxseed cake, chaff screenings, the husks and debris from grain milling that we normally throw away. And here, she reaches the last pile. Small and precious. Actual rye flour. 25% of the total mass. Pavel Andreev, the senior baker who objected at the institute, crosses his arms. Comrade Shatalova, I've baked bread for 30 years. My father baked. His father baked. This, he gestures at the table, is not bread. You're correct, Shatalova agrees. It's not bread. It's survival. And starting today, it's the only thing standing between Leningrad and famine. She picks up a typed sheet and hands copies to each baker. These are the exact ratios. You will measure by weight, not volume. Every ingredient must be precise to within 2 grams per 10 kilogram batch. The mixing time is exactly 14 minutes. The proofing time is 40 minutes at 27 degrees Celsius. The baking time is 32 minutes at 210 degrees Celsius. Why so specific? Another baker asks. Because at 13 minutes of mixing, the cellulose doesn't integrate properly and causes separation. At 15 minutes, overkneading makes the dough too dense to rise. At 41 minutes of proofing, bacterial growth creates off flavors. At 31 minutes of baking, the center remains moist and spoils quickly. She looks at each man in turn. I spent 86 hours calculating these ratios. I know they work because I've baked 200 test loaves. Some killed the rats I fed them to. Some simply fell apart. These specifications, she taps the paper, represent the only combination that produces safe, stable, nutritionally adequate bread. Andreev picks up some sawdust and sniffs it. And if we deviate, people die, Shatalova says simply. Too much cellulose causes intestinal blockage. Too little protein causes kwashiorkor. Your liver swells. Your abdomen distends. You die from organ failure. Too rapid baking leaves raw patches that breed bacteria. This formula works only at these exact parameters. She pulls a dark, dense loaf from a basket and places it on the table. This is the product. It weighs 125 grams. It contains approximately 300 calories, 6 grams of protein, 3 grams of fat, and sufficient carbohydrates to maintain basic metabolic function. It tastes terrible. The texture is coarse, but it will keep you alive. She breaks the loaf open. The interior is gray-brown, almost black, with visible fibrous material. It looks more like compressed paper than bread. Who wants to try it? She asks. No one moves. Then, slowly, Andreev reaches out and takes a piece. He chews slowly, his expression carefully neutral. After a long moment, he swallows. It's bread, he says finally. Barely, but it's bread. One by one, the other bakers try pieces. The reactions range from grimaces to outright disgust, but no one spits it out. No one refuses. Can you make this? Shatalova asks. Every day, thousands of loaves, with exactly these specifications. Andreev looks at the formula again, then at his fellow bakers. We can make it. Then we start now, Shatalova says. The first distribution is at 6 a.m. Leningrad is waiting. For the next 2 hours, she moves between mixing stations, checking ratios, adjusting techniques. The sawdust must be sifted twice to remove splinters. The cottonseed cake must be ground until it's powder fine. The mixing must be vigorous, but not violent. At 5:47 a.m., the first batch emerges from the ovens. 36 loaves of gray-black bread that look nothing like bread. Shatalova weighs each one. 124 grams. 126 grams. 125 grams. Within tolerance. She breaks one open, examines the crumb structure, smells it. The texture is correct, dense, but not solid. The aroma is bitter, woody, wrong, but not toxic. Bag them, she orders. Standard ration cards. 1 loaf per person per day. By 6:15 a.m., the first Leningrad civilians receive their new ration. An old woman named Klavdia Stepanova is among them. She takes the dark loaf from the distribution clerk, turns it over in her hands, frowns. This is bread, she asks. This is your ration, the clerk replies. Stepanova tears off a piece and chews it. Her expression shifts through confusion, disgust, resignation. Then she wraps the rest carefully in a cloth and puts it in her bag. Better than nothing, she mutters. Olga Shatalova, watching from the bakery doorway, knows that better than nothing will have to be enough. Because nothing is exactly what Leningrad will have in 3 weeks if this formula fails. November 7th, 1941. Leningrad has been under siege for 60 days. The temperature is minus 18 degrees Celsius. Snow covers the corpses that couldn't be buried because the ground is frozen. Olga Shatalova walks through the Haymarket district, conducting what she calls nutritional surveillance. In reality, she's watching people die. The 125-gram ration is working mathematically. Her calculations hold. The cellulose bread provides just enough nutrition to prevent immediate starvation. But just enough and survival are not the same thing. She passes a woman sitting against a building, too weak to stand. The woman holds a ration card but no longer has the strength to walk to the distribution point. In her hand is half a piece of the gray bread. She's eating it so slowly that each bite takes a minute. Shatalova kneels beside her. Citizen, you need to eat faster. The calories. Tastes better slow. The woman whispers. Her lips are cracked and bleeding. Her eyes are sunken. Make it last. Shatalova knows this is wrong nutritionally. The body needs calories now, all at once, to fuel the desperate work of staying warm. But she also understands what this woman is doing, transforming mere survival into something resembling a meal, making a ritual of eating, even when eating is reduced to choking down sawdust. Would you like me to help you to the distribution point? Shatalova asks. For tomorrow's ration? The woman shakes her head. Daughter coming. Soon. Shatalova wants to tell her that no one is coming, that everyone is too weak to help anyone else. But instead she stands and continues walking. At bakery number 18, she finds Pavel Andreev slumped over a mixing station. He's lost 20 kilograms in 2 months. His hands shake as he measures out sawdust. Production numbers? Shatalova asks. 12,000 loaves yesterday, Andreev reports. His voice is hoarse. Lost another baker. Froze to death walking home. Shatalova makes a notation in her logbook. 12,000 loaves. 1.5 million grams of bread. Enough for 12,000 people for one day. But Leningrad still has 2.4 million civilians. The mathematics are catching up. We're running low on cottonseed cake. Andreev continues. The oil mills have nothing left to press. I'll find substitutes, Shatalova says. She's already calculating. Cottonseed cake provides 18% protein. She needs to replace that with linseed, soy residue, meat scraps from the slaughterhouses that are running out of animals. There's talk of adding bone meal, Andreev says quietly, from the cemetery. Shatalova's expression doesn't change. She's considered this. Ground bone provides calcium and trace minerals. It would work nutritionally, but psychologically, not yet, she says. We're not there yet. But they're close. She can see it in every face on the street. The Leningrad face. Skin stretched tight over skull. Eyes enormous. Lips drawn back from teeth. The look of a body consuming itself for fuel. Her formula is keeping people alive, but it's not keeping them healthy. Dysentery is rampant because the cellulose irritates intestinal walls. Scurvy is appearing because the bread lacks vitamin C, beriberi from vitamin B deficiency, edema from protein deficiency. The bread is working exactly as calculated, and people are dying anyway. If you were a scientist in this situation, would you adjust the formula to be slightly more palatable, knowing it might reduce the total number of people you could feed, or keep it as efficient as possible even if it meant more suffering? This is an easy question. Share your thoughts below. December 28, 1941. The State Bread Research Institute. Temperature inside, -5 degrees Celsius. The heating system failed 3 weeks ago. Olga Shatalova sits at her desk, wrapped in 3 coats, compiling death statistics. The numbers arrive daily from the city registry office, though daily has become a flexible concept in a city where time is measured in ration distributions rather than hours. November mortality, 11,085 recorded deaths. December estimate, 52,881. January projection, 96,000. She cross-references these numbers against bread production. The correlation is exact. When bakery output dropped by 8% due to fuel shortages on December 15th, the death rate increased by 12% 3 days later. 3 days. That's how long the human body can survive when the metabolic deficit becomes critical. A knock on her office door. She looks up to find Director Nestorov, thinner now, aged 20 years and 4 months. The military Soviet wants your assessment, he says. Lake Ladoga ice road is operational. Supply trucks are getting through. Can we increase the ration? Shatalova pulls out her ledgers. Current bread production, 915,000 loaves daily. Current population, approximately 2.1 million civilians, 480,000 military. At 125 grams per civilian and 200 grams per military, we're consuming 362,500 kilograms of flour equivalent daily. She flips pages. The ice road is delivering 180 tons of flour per day. That's 180,000 kilograms, which allows for, she calculates quickly, a 15-gram increase in the civilian ration, from 125 to 140 grams. 15 grams. Nestorov's voice cracks. That's all. That's an extra 60 calories per person per day. Shatalova responds. Metabolically significant. The difference between 400 and 460 calories is the difference between organ failure in 40 days versus 60 days. She meets his eyes. 15 grams means another 20 days of life. For everyone. Nesterov sinks into a chair. 20 days. We're measuring human existence in 20-day increments. We're measuring it in calories and grams because that's the only measurement that matters now, Shatalova says. Her voice is gentle but firm. Sentiment doesn't extend life. Mathematics does. She returns to her calculations. If the ice road maintains 180 tons daily through January, and if we can increase to 250 tons by February when the ice thickens, we can raise the ration to 200 grams by March. At 200 grams, mortality decreases to sustainable levels. People stop dying faster than we can bury them. And if the ice road fails? Nesterov asks. Shatalova doesn't answer immediately. She's already calculated this scenario. Ice road fails. Supplies stop. Ration drops to 100 grams, then 75. At 75 grams, the body cannot maintain core temperature. Cardiac arrest from hypothermia becomes universal. If the ice road fails, Leningrad has approximately 40 days before complete population collapse, she finally says. But the ice road won't fail. The mathematics of ice weight distribution are solid. The NKVD engineers know what they're doing. She sounds more confident than she feels. Over the next 2 weeks, Shatalova personally reformulates the bread recipe 7 times. The ice road brings real flour now, not just sawdust and cellulose. She gradually adjusts the ratios. January 5th, 30% real flour, 70% substitutes. January 12th, 35% real flour. January 20th, 40% real flour. Each adjustment must be calculated precisely. Too much real flour too quickly, and the increased supplies won't last. Too little, and people keep dying at current rates. On January 24th, 1942, the civilian ration increases to 200 grams. The bread is still gray, still bitter, still contains sawdust and cottonseed cake, but it's noticeably more bread-like. The texture is softer. The taste is less offensive. Olga Shatalova receives no celebration, no ceremony. She simply receives a new requisition form requesting production specifications for 200-gram loaves. She calculates the new ratios, writes out the formula, sends it to every bakery in the city. Then she goes home to her unheated apartment and eats her own 200-gram ration of sawdust bread, the same as everyone else. May 15th, 1942. The siege continues, but the crisis has passed. The ice road operated successfully all winter. Now that Lake Ladoga is thawed, barges bring supplies. The bread ration is 400 grams, still well below pre-war levels, but enough that people can think about something other than food. The State Bread Research Institute has received orders to compile a comprehensive report on food science operations during the siege. Olga Shatalova sits in her office, now heated, though only to 12 degrees Celsius, organizing 8 months of data. Total bread produced using her formula, 127 million loaves. Total sawdust consumed by the civilian population, 6,840 tons. Total cottonseed cake, 4,200 tons. Total actual flour saved by substitution, 41,000 tons. She converts tons to human lives. Each ton of saved flour, stretched over the 8-month period, supported approximately 380 people at survival rations. 41,000 tons equals 15.58 million person-days of survival. Or, calculated another way, approximately 200,000 people who would have starved but didn't. The number feels both enormous and inadequate. 200,000 saved. But 632,000 died anyway, from starvation, cold, disease, artillery. The siege has killed more than the Battle of Stalingrad will, more than the Battle of Berlin, more than any military engagement in human history, except possibly the Second Battle of Kiev. A junior researcher, Yevgeny Mikhailov, enters with a stack of files. Comrade Shatalova, the post-siege nutrition study results. She opens the first file. Medical examinations of 2,000 randomly selected survivors. Chronic vitamin deficiencies, 94%. Permanent digestive damage, 61%. Edema, 38%. Scurvy, 29%. The cellulose bread caused lasting intestinal damage in a majority of subjects, Mikhailov notes, particularly those who consumed it for more than 90 consecutive days. Shatalova reads through the medical descriptions. Chronic inflammation of the intestinal wall, reduced absorption efficiency, permanent changes in gut flora. Her formula kept people alive, but it damaged them in ways that may never fully heal. Added to the report, she says quietly. There's something else, Mikhailov continues. The Ministry of Health wants to know if the formula could be used again, in other sieges, other famines. Shatalova looks up sharply. Used again, as a strategic resource, for future military contingencies. She's silent for a long moment. Then, no. Comrade Shatalova, the ministry. No, she repeats more firmly. This formula was a desperate measure for a desperate situation. It worked because it had to work, because the alternative was immediate mass death. But it's not sustainable. It's not healthy. It's barely food. She stands and walks to the window. Outside, civilians move through the streets, still gaunt, still weak, but alive. If we ever face this situation again, we find a better solution. We stockpile real food. We plan evacuation routes. We never, ever put 3 million people in a position where their survival depends on eating sawdust. Mikhailov makes notes. I'll include your recommendation in the report. After he leaves, Shatalova returns to her calculations. But now she's not calculating rations or nutritional content. She's calculating something else. If she had gotten the formula wrong by just 2%, how many additional people would have died? If the cellulose content had been 17% instead of 15%, if the baking time had been 30 minutes instead of 32, the mathematics of life and death reduced to percentages and grams. She thinks about the old woman at Haymarket, eating her bread slowly to make it last. She wonders if that woman survived, wonders if she's still out there somewhere, still alive, still carrying the memory of that bitter gray bread in her mouth. September 8th, 1943. Exactly 2 years after the siege began. Leningrad remains encircled, though loosely. The Red Army opened a narrow land corridor in January 1943, allowing limited overland supply. Olga Shatalova has been promoted to Deputy Director of the State Bread Research Institute. She now oversees all food production logistics for the Leningrad front. But today, she's returned to bakery number 18 for the first time in a year. Pavel Andreev is still here somehow. Still measuring, still mixing, still baking. The ovens produce normal bread now, real bread, made from real flour, though still rationed. But Andreev has kept one mixing station unchanged, preserved exactly as it was during the winter of 1941-42. On the steel table, sawdust, cottonseed cake, malt flour, the ingredients of survival. I kept it as a reminder, Andreev explains. So we never forget what we did, what we had to do. Shatalova picks up a handful of sawdust. It feels exactly as she remembers, dry, light, almost weightless. Have you made any since? Not since February 1942, Andreev confirms. But I could. Right now. Exactly your formula. I memorized it. Why? He's quiet for a moment. Because it worked. Because you said it would work and everyone thought you were crazy. But you were right. Because science saved us when everything else failed. Shatalova sets down the sawdust. Science didn't save us. Desperation saved us. We had no choice. No, Andreev disagrees. We had choices. We could have rioted. We could have eaten the flour too fast and starved in November. We could have given up. But you calculated a way forward. You gave us something between death today and death tomorrow. You gave us another day, and then another, and eventually that added up to survival. Shatalova doesn't know how to respond. She's not comfortable with praise, never has been. She did what the mathematics required. Nothing more. But Andreev continues. Do you know what people call that bread now? Shatalova's portion. That's what they say. I survived on Shatalova's portion. Like it's something proud. Like eating sawdust was some kind of victory. It wasn't victory, Shatalova says. It was survival. Same thing when you're surrounded by Germans. They stand in silence, looking at the ingredients that fed a city when nothing else could. Then Shatalova turns to leave. Comrade Shatalova, Andreev calls after her. If it happens again, if we face another siege, will the formula work? She pauses in the doorway. I hope we never have to find out. January 27th, 1944. After 872 days, the siege of Leningrad is finally lifted. The German army group north retreats in chaos. The city is free. Final death toll, approximately 632,000 civilians. Most from starvation. Most during the winter of 1941 to 42. Olga Iosifovna Shatalova's bread formula was in continuous use from September 20th, 1941 to February 11th, 1942, 145 days. During that period, it sustained 2.4 million people on rations that conventional nutrition science said were impossible. Post-war analysis by the Soviet Ministry of Health concluded that the formula prevented an estimated 200,000 additional deaths by extending flour supplies through the critical winter months. Without it, Leningrad's flour reserves would have been exhausted by late October 1941, 6 weeks before the Lake Ladoga ice road became operational. The formula was never used again. Shatalova refused to allow it to be published in scientific journals, arguing that it represented a solution so terrible that its very existence invited its use. She spent the rest of her career developing food preservation and storage methods designed to ensure no city would ever again face Leningrad's choice. She died in 1978, age 74, having never spoken publicly about her work during the siege. Her personal papers, discovered after her death, contained 8 leather-bound notebooks filled with calculations. The final entry, dated February 11th, 1942, reads simply, "Today we stopped adding sawdust to the bread. The formula worked. I wish it hadn't needed to. The mathematics were perfect. The bread was terrible. And 200,000 people lived because one woman refused to accept that starvation was inevitable. What do you think took more courage, calculating the formula, or being the first person to eat it? And could something like this ever happen again in a modern siege? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This story raises questions that don't have easy answers.